before you went in the service. So when were you born?
May the 17th, 1923 at Wellington, Texas. I lived at Wellington until I graduated out of high school in 1941. I went to Washington, D.C. and was working civil service when the World War II started, when Pearl Harbor was. And I got drafted out of Washington, D.C. and went into the Army.
And you said the first they were going to make an engineer of you, right? You went to engineering school?
Well, I took my basic training with the 87th Infantry Division, but then I was sent to an engineering school at University of Georgia at Athens, Georgia, and spent 6 months there getting towards an engineering education, but they decided they didn't have enough infantrymen, so they shipped me over to Augusta, Georgia, 10th Armored Division, where I was in the 20th Armored Infantry Battalion. And I ended up going overseas with that unit.
Okay, actually, where'd you go first? To Great Britain before you went to Europe? Into Germany? Or?
We was the first division to go straight from the United States to France. We landed at Cherbourg, France.
So that was after D-Day, after the invasion of Europe from Great Britain.
The front lines was up a little ways east of Paris at the time we landed. By the time we got to the first lines, we had our first action at a holding front around Metz. And then...
Metz is in France?
Yeah, Metz, France. It's pretty close to the German border. And then we pulled back from that and went up into Luxembourg, and we made a drive out of Luxembourg to Saarbrücken, Germany, where we was relieved for a rest. Relieved for a rest, and was back on the rest at a rest area when the Battle of the Bulge started.
And that's when the Germans overran the U.S. forward positions
around east of Bastogne in that area.
Okay, let me ask some questions in order they have them now.
Okay.
And if we think of some other things, we can add to them, okay?
Okay.
The first question is, what was your rank and years of service? I guess the rank when you started and when you got out.
I was started as a private and I ended up as a corporal, so I didn't go up the ladder very far. But
it's hard to advance in grade when you're a prisoner of war, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how many years were you in the service?
33 months, exactly.
A little over 2.5 years then.
Yeah. Well, 3 months short of 3 years.
Okay. When were you a prisoner of war?
I was captured in around December the 18th of 1944 and got released when the war was over in Europe in May of 45. I was actually behind the Russians actually released us, or I don't know if you'd say the Russians released us or not. The Russians was coming close to the camp where they was holding me prisoner, and the Germans decided to march us out of there to the American lines. And
well, it's they got a later question. So
okay.
About your release. First of all, how were you captured?
Well, we was like I say, was on this rest area, and the Battle of the Bulge started, so they sent our division up there for reinforcements, and my unit was picked to lead the division on the way up there, or lead one column of the division. So we went through Bastogne and went on out east of Bastogne and stopped for the night. The next morning there was Germans on every hill practically around us, so we had a firefight, mostly tank fights from our tanks and their tanks. But they had us nearly surrounded, so late that afternoon they said to get out if you could. They sent word down to get out if you could. They was about 10 or 11 of us got in a half-track and tried to drive back down the road to get out to the rear. And we got down there a ways, and there was tanks and half-tracks knocked out from cannon fire on the road, and we couldn't get by, and they had deep ditches on each side. So,
Was there firing going on at then around you?
well, they was mortar fire and coming in at us, and so we had 2 wounded men in the half track with us, and I was by the door, so I was one of the first ones to get out of the half track, and I handed my rifle back up to somebody in the half track to help get one of the wounded men out, and it ended up there was 2 of us carrying each wounded man, and the lieutenant was with us, and he had a carbine, and all the rest of them got out of the half track and run across an open field to some woods, but there was mortar fire coming in there, and this lieutenant didn't think he knew we couldn't run with these wounded men, so he said we'd stay on the road and go down there to a haystack that was outside the road and hide behind that till nightfall. And we didn't hardly get behind the haystack and get these wounded men laid down till a squad of Germans came up over the ridge right practically on top of us, and Lieutenant had a carbine. That's the only weapon we had, so we had no choice but to surrender.
The next question is, what was a typical day like?
As a prisoner of war?
Well, I think first before you were a prisoner, like when they called you guys back to the front from your rest area, did you realize what was happening? Did you know that?
Well, not completely, but we knew that they was Germans had started to drive, and they was trying to reinforce the people that they had overrun up there, but we didn't know how bad it was at that time. And we got up there in the middle of the night, and there was one soldier come by going down the road all by himself. He said he was the only man left out of a battalion of infantrymen. I don't believe that, but he thought that was true, I think.
Did that make you wonder whether you should keep going to the front?
Well, we was already on the front at that time. We
okay.
was stopped for the night, bivouacked, or stopped and dug in for the night at that point.
Up to that point, was there a lot of fighting that you were involved in, or was it more?
Well, not in that battle, but I was, like I say, we made a drive from Luxembourg to Saarbrücken, and was involved in quite a bit of fighting.
So were you on edge all the time?
Well, most of the time.
Even at night? Could you sleep very well?
Well, we always took turns sleeping.
Uh-huh. So you always had guards?
Had guards at all times, yeah. People wait to watch.
By that time, it was winter time, wasn't it, during the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, it was December, yeah.
Was it pretty miserable conditions?
Not till actually about the time the Bulge started, and then it getting a lot of snow and stuff going on, and it got pretty bad conditions. Most of the time before that wasn't too bad.
How were you equipped for the cold and food and all? Were you fed pretty well, and did you keep pretty warm and dry, or?
As a prisoner of war?
No, before.
Oh, well, we wasn't fed extra. I don't know, mostly field rations.
There weren't?
And we didn't have an area to set up and cook when we was in action. We just had to eat on the go and sleep in pup tents or just in a sleeping bag or whatever. But
right on the ground?
Right on the ground. And in fact, I got trench foot and was sent back before they actually pulled back from that position. I was sent back to hospital for a week with trench foot.
What is that? Is that like a bacterial infection or something?
Bacterial from too much
it's sort of like
moisture and you not being able to pull your shoes off and dry your feet out mostly is what.
It's like a severe case of athlete's foot, maybe?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Did you still have it when you went back and were captured?
No, I got over it. Just laying in this hospital without any shoes on and your shoes feet above your head for about a week, and that was all it took to cure him.
Okay, I guess then the question is, after you're captured, what was a typical day like?
Well, once we got into this prisoner of war camp,
Did they take you by truck or train to
we walked back into Germany for 10 days, and then they put us up in an old warehouse with dirt floors and holes in the walls for a couple of days, and then they put us on a train and took us on back to where I ended up the prisoner of war camp. And it was down close to the Czechoslovakian border on the Elbe River.
Were there other nationalities other than Americans in the camp?
Just a few British soldiers that had been captured was all. Mostly was Americans.
So what was a day like when you were in the prisoner of war camp?
Most of the time we was actually doing actual pick and shovel work on a railroad right away to an underground munitions plant, which we never finished, and they never finished the underground munitions plant. But we had, in the morning you got up, you could, if you wanted to, you could go get a cup of black burnt barley
soup.
Well, more like coffee or tea, but it wouldn't. That was the only thing you could get in the morning if you wanted it. Most time we just skipped it because it tastes so burnt and stuff. We didn't really care that much for it. Then you went to work all day, and then that night you got your only meal of the day, which was a bowl of soup and a piece of German bread, which was the big round flat loaves, looks like a cake rather than bread. And we had about 1 2/3 loaves of bread for a room of 35 men, and I ended up with the job to cut the bread up and divide it among the people. I seemed to have the best knack of getting it as even as we could, but it never was the same amount, so every day you had to figure out how big a piece to cut to get the number of pieces you needed out of it. And we were so hungry and so conscious of food that nobody wanted to get the smallest piece, and so the only way we passed the bread out, we had somebody take the list of names of the men in the room and stand in the corner with his back to the room, and I'd put my hand on a piece of bread and he'd call out a name, and that person got that piece of bread. So there was no way that anybody could have any favoritism on it.
It was always random.
Yeah.
Did you get anything through the Red Cross in the way of food or anything?
Got one time we got some Red Cross packages, but they was a box about a foot square, I guess, and 4 inches deep or something. And we got, I think, one box to every 6 men or something like that. So you didn't have much. We didn't really get that much good out of it.
Did Red Cross
had some sugar cubes and some different things like that in there.
Did you ever have anybody from like the Red Cross or anything coming in to inspect and see that you were being treated okay?
No, never seen a person like that. They didn't. I don't guess the Germans allowed them to. I don't know.
Did you still observe rank and so forth? Is that how you kept order in
there was no rank. All the officers were separated from the enlisted men when they kept prisoner of war. Officers was kept other places, and they had better rations and better living conditions than we did.
So
we had no rank amongst ourselves. Of course, we had guards. We didn't have any decisions to make anyway. They made decisions for us. So.
Did some of the German guards speak English so you could understand what they wanted you to do?
No, hardly. Not hardly at all. Mostly they used American boys that could speak German as interpreters. So that's the way we went there.
you told me you sometimes would go out on work parties and slip away and maybe go steal a piece of pie or something from.
Well, I slept away a few times, and the most I ever got was this one time when I slipped away and went up on this hill behind the village that we was working out beside of, and there was a house up there, and the white lady came out of the house and went to hang her clothes up on the clothesline, her washing. I slipped in her house and got me both pockets full of potatoes, raw potatoes, and after I got them, I went over a ways, and there was a wood pile there, and I sat down behind that wood pile and was eating one of these potatoes raw. And another lady walking a dog walked right up on me, and I didn't see her till it was too late to get away. And we couldn't converse very much because she didn't speak English, and I didn't know much German. But she kept saying Krieg was no good, which war wasn't any good, you know.
Uh-huh.
And she told me she's going to go get me a sandwich, but it got too late, and I didn't know if she'd bring back guards or bring me a sandwich, either one what. But anyway, I went back, and they was already lined up and started marching back to camp when I got back to the
work
crew, and so I hid beside the road, and when they came by, I slipped in the column, and then I made my way to the front and told this interpreter that the guards always kept up there by them that, of course, they knew my prisoner of war number, knew I was missing, so I told them that I'd been out going to the bathroom when they lined up, and I came back. So, but I was afraid they was going to search me when we got back to camp, so I went around back and forth in the column, find boys in my room and friends of mine, and gave them potatoes, so I didn't keep hardly any potatoes on my own person. We got back to camp, they'd all ate the potatoes I gave them. So
and the Germans didn't even see you eating?
No, I don't know. We was marching, and then so I didn't get much good out of them potatoes. I got a few, but not very many. And to start with, when we first there, this camp was on a hill over the Elbe River, and there was a stairway went down this cliff, a metal stairway that about two people could have went side by side. And the first thing we had to do was build stairs where about 8 or 10 people could go side by side down them, so they could march us down them to the river. And we cut down saplings about 4 inches in diameter and laid them down and packed dirt behind them to make these stairs. And then they had a ferry that it just had an anchor up in the middle of the river, and a long cable on it, and they just let the current swing it back and forth across the river. So after we got our stairs finished, they marched us down there every day and put us on this ferry and took us across the river to do the work we was doing on this railroad right away.
That's actually illegal, isn't it, under the Geneva Conventions, to have prisoners of war doing work?
Yeah.
Wartime work?
Yeah.
You couldn't refuse.
We couldn't refuse, yeah. In fact, one day I tried to tell the guard I was too sick to work, and he hit me across the back with his rifle butt, and I decided I could work anyway. So that was all there was to that. But most of the time, the guards weren't too bad.
There's going to be a question about that.
I was,
while you were a prisoner, or even before, were you aware of things happening to the Jewish people that the Germans were?
no, I wasn't. I wasn't in on that at all, and there was no civilian prisoners anywhere around my camp, so I didn't know nothing about it really.
Were there any Jewish soldiers that you know of?
No. Well, just maybe American Jews. But
that's what I mean.
They wasn't sorted out. They didn't try to sort them out of the prisoners of war. They didn't bother with that.
How were you treated by civilians and the guards?
Well, that about the little story I told you about stealing the potatoes, and seeing that woman's about the only civilians I saw all the time I was prisoner of war. The guards, it was kind of funny if you had a very small detail where you had only one guard. You generally didn't have to do much. He'd be real lenient. But if you got two guards, each one of them was afraid the other might be a Gestapo man or something, so then they'd get real strict, and we had to really toe the line if we had more than one guard. But most of the guards that were older men that couldn't really fight on the front line anymore, and most of them be real lenient with you unless they was afraid somebody's going to turn them in, and they'd get strict.
Did you even get to be at all friendly with any of them?
No, we didn't see much of them. They pretty much stayed apart from us. They'd just take us to work and pick a spot where they could see about everybody and sit and watch.
So when you weren't out working,
they had one civilian guy. He was, I think he had lived in Brooklyn in the United States, and he was the one that was directing our work. And of course he talked English fluently.
When you weren't out on your work details, then you were pretty much to yourselves in these, wherever they were keeping you, in the kind of like barracks?
Yeah, these barracks, we had about 35 men to the room, and had double-deck bunk beds with four people could sleep on each bunk bed, two on the top, two on the bottom, and then it was all around the side of the room. It wasn't too big of a room, and a wood stove out in the middle to heat it with, and that was about all there was in it.
So you were in that prison camp, I guess, around 5 months, December 44 to May of 45.
Yeah, most of the time. One time I was sent out on a separate work detail to a brick making factory out east of, close to Dresden. And we was out there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks is about all. And then the British and the Americans bombed Dresden real bad. And this one night, well, they bombed them one day, and then that night and the next day, and that day we didn't see the sun all day from smoke covering the sun from that city, and we was about 15 kilometers from it. But so then they decided they better get us back to the regular prisoner of war camp after that bombing, so they took us back.
Was that towards the end?
No, that was quite a way. That was one of my first work details when I got to this camp. I just happened to be one of them that got to go out. It wasn't but about 20 of us went to this brick factory.
This is not a question from Sean, but one just thought of it myself. Did you see any changes in attitudes or anything towards the end? You didn't know the war was going to be over, but did you sense maybe something was going on before you actually were released? Or?
Yeah, I think we knew that things wasn't going good for them. Just these boys that interpreted picked up stuff from the guards that we heard quite a bit. That we knew it was going to be over before too long, but we didn't know exactly when. Then they of course, when they, like I say, the Russians was going to come in there, and then they decided to try to get the American lines.
The Germans did.
Yeah.
Because they would rather be prisoners of war with the Americans than with the Russians.
Yeah, and they told us they was going to march us to the American lines, but they mostly wanted to get there themselves, and after they got us out on the road and got us started, they was in better shape than us. They took off and just left us to go along on our own, and that's the way we was released. The Russians overtook us, and they had us move into houses with civilians in the towns we was at, and we stayed with them till they got about 5, 6, 7, 8 days. I don't know exactly. They finally said they had a train at this town about 5 kilometers from one we was at, and one just told us to get over there the next morning by 11 o'clock to get on that train to go to American lines. And that was May the 17th, my birthday, that we went over there and caught that train. but they had so many troop trains and stuff that train had to go on the siding and stay there about every 2 or 3 miles or something, and stay there for half an hour or something while the troop trains went by.
So that's how you celebrated your 22nd birthday?
Yeah.
Was getting on that train to go back to the American line?
Yeah. But didn't actually make it till the next day before we got to American lines.
Did you trust the Russians? Did they were perceived as our friends then, right?
Yeah. Well, when they came in there and they got us all, rounded us all up, and this one Russian that spoke English, Russian officer, told us just to move in with civilians and try not to get any weapons or anything. He didn't want us getting in any firefights with their troops or anything, but says if the people you're living with try to give you any trouble, just get a hold of one of us and we'll see that they straighten out. But actually the people we was living with was, I think they was so afraid of the Russians that they was glad to have us there. They would like for us to stay right on through, because as long as we was in the house, the Russians didn't bother them, because they knew we was in there.
That part of Germany became part of East Germany, right?
Well, that was actually in Czechoslovakia.
Oh, okay.
What was Czechoslovakia before?
Okay.
We had went down into there when we got overtook by the Russians.
But after the war, unless those people slipped west, they were under the the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
They were living under the Soviet Union. Where were you when you learned that Hitler was defeated?
I guess just there. I don't know. I'm sure we knew the war's over after the Russians came in there, and we was told that. So we knew that Germany was defeated. When
the Russians came?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but was there a fight? There probably was still fighting going on in some areas, though, wasn't there?
They might have been. I don't know, but that they had just a little brief battle that morning when we was walking down. Was going down this road through some woods, and it was a fairly narrow road, and it was German civilians and soldiers and everything else fleeing, but we was actually getting along faster than the cars, and they had horse carts and everything else on that road, trying to go. And so we was actually walking faster than they was getting along because of the traffic jam. But about 2 or 3 rounds of cannon fire came in there pretty close. We run out in the woods and hid for a while. When we come back, the road was completely empty, and we'd heard the Russians go through there. Where them Germans took all their cars and carts and stuff, I never could figure out, but they got out of there in a hurry some way.
How did you find out Hitler was dead?
I didn't know that till I got back to France, which once I got the American lines, they flew us to France right away, so I was back at Camp Lucky Strike in France when I found out Hitler was dead.
Were you just so relieved and probably not feeling real healthy, right? That you didn't really care too much?
No,
what was going on?
I was just interested in eating and sleeping and getting well, yeah, mostly.
How long did you recuperate in Europe before they took you back to the States?
Well, we was in Camp Lucky Strike for 10 days, and...
do you know where that was in France?
No, not exactly. I just know it's a big holding area. They's holding former prisoner of war and stuff like that in to get them ready to send back to the States. And they fed us 4 times a day, but they would just give you, but I put on 2 pounds a day, and that.
Wow.
I was down to about 105 pounds when I got, my normal weight was 155 or something. I put on 2 pounds a day there, and then was on the boat for 10 days coming home to put on 1 pound a day on the boat, so I looked a lot different the time I got back to the States than I did when I was first released.
You had to get false teeth at a fairly young age, and you always thought that your prisoner of war experience of not being fed well caused your teeth to deteriorate, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I knew I wasn't getting hardly any calcium because my fingernails, I didn't trim them the whole time I was Breitner War for 5 months. And so if your fingernails didn't grow, your teeth wasn't getting much help either. And I had only one cavity in my life before I went overseas. And when I come back, I had kept having so many cavities I couldn't keep them filled. So I finally just had to get false teeth when I was in my 30s. Yeah.
Did even when you were released and going back to the U.S. lines, did you ever? You probably didn't have. Did you? Here's a question: did German townsfolk fear Americans? Did any thank you? Did you?
I didn't see any. I'm sorry, but they wasn't. I wasn't. Except in that one village when I was behind the Russian lines, and like I say, the ones we was staying with about the only ones we seen because we didn't get out and around much. We stayed pretty close in that house, rather than get mixed up with the Russian soldiers, you know. And they was really glad to have us there and wished we could have stayed because in fact, it was a doctor's house and he had 2 teenage daughters and he was worried what was going to happen to his daughters. But as long as we was there, the Russians didn't come in and bother his daughters, but he's afraid they might after we left, which I had no way knowing what happened to them.
That's all the questions that Sean has. I think a big part of his project is going to be comparing Hitler and what he meant to the world and what we had to do to defeat him to Saddam Hussein. Do you have any feelings at all about the comparison of those two people and how threatening they were to the world? And
well, I personally feel like Hitler was probably a bigger threat than Saddam Hussein because he had so much more firepower and military backing at his disposal than Hussein had. Of course, he didn't have an atom bomb, but they had a really excellent army, and they'd done a lot of damage to the world before they finally stopped.
And they were trying to develop an atomic bomb.
Yeah, and they actually had jet airplanes before the war was over, but they didn't.
And they had rockets. They had
rockets. We used to, when we was on the holding front around Metz, we was just not too far from where they was firing their rockets off.
V2s or
V2s to Britain,
3s or
whatever to Britain, and we could hear them fire off and see them go over on the way to Britain.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
At night, basically.
When you were fighting, nowadays when we fight a war, we have really close coordination between the Air Force and the Army, so that everybody's pretty much involved in a battle. But when you were fighting, was there any Air Force involved, or was there any?
Oh yeah, and we had colored panels that we put on our vehicles, and each day you had a different color.
Okay.
And this was especially important during the Battle of the Bulge because the Germans, captured a lot of our Jeeps and stuff like that, and they was using them, but they didn't know what color panel to put on them, and if it didn't have the right color panel on it, the American planes attacked them when the weather got where they could. In fact, the captain of my company got killed after we was captured. He got on back to Bastogne, and I found out later that he got killed by the American planes because him and his sergeant went out in the Jeep without putting up the right colored panel, and the American planes strafed him and actually killed him and wounded the sergeant.
Hmm. So accidents happen, don't
yeah,
they?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you want to mention or talk a little bit about before we conclude?
No, not a lot. I just thank the Lord that I got through it all. Lived a long life like I have.
And had a wonderful wife and 2 wonderful sons.
You said it.
And I guess if Sean has any follow-up questions, he can ask us. He can ask you through us, or he can send you an email, right?
Right.
Because he's got your email address now.
Okay. Good.
Sound good?
Good.
Okay. Well, thanks
Okay.
a lot.
Yeah.